Here is a truth that plenty of folks who have been driving for decades have never heard anyone say out loud. The bottle-marked synthetic oil on the auto shop shelf may not actually be synthesized in the way most people picture. It is not just ordinary mineral oil that got cleaned up a little and sold for more. And it is not quite the magic liquid born entirely in a laboratory that the advertising likes to suggest either. The truth sits somewhere right in the middle. And once it clicks, the next time anyone stands in front of that row of shiny bottles, everything looks completely different.
Welcome to Secrets of Everyday Things, the channel where everyday secrets are uncovered and explained.
Let us rewind a bit, because to understand how synthetic oil is made, you first have to understand why it came to exist at all. Traditional motor oil is created by refining crude oil, that thick black liquid pumped up from the ground. Crude oil is really a chaotic mix of countless hydrocarbon molecules of all shapes and sizes, tangled together with sulfur, wax, nitrogen, and other impurities. When it is refined, workers try to draw out the best lubricating fraction, but no matter how carefully it is filtered, that jumble of molecules is never perfectly uniform. Inside a running engine that is burning hot, that lack of uniformity is exactly where the weakness shows. And then a war came along. In the early 20th century, Germany was desperately short of crude oil. It had almost no oil fields of its own, while a war machine devoured fuel and lubricants without pause. In 1925, two German scientists named Franz Fischer and Hans-Tropsch worked out a method that later carried their names. They proved you could take gas, specifically a mix of carbon monoxide and hydrogen, and use heat, pressure, and a catalyst to join those atoms into liquid hydrocarbon chains. In other words, they did not dig oil up. They built oil up from gas. During the war years, German scientists tested more than 3,500 synthetic ester compounds between 1938 and 1944, searching for an oil that could survive the biting cold of the Eastern Front and the ferocious heat inside an engine. That was the moment the idea of an oil that is engineered rather than dug up truly took root. The war ended, but the idea did not die. It moved to the sky. Early jet aircraft posed a problem that ordinary mineral oil simply could not solve. Jet engines ran so hot and worked in conditions so extreme that regular oil would break down, burn, and lose its protective power in the blink of an eye. Only synthetic oil could hold up. It was the demands of aviation that pushed this technology to grow up. By 1972, an American named Al Amatuzio, himself a jet fighter pilot, brought that synthetic oil down from the sky to the ground and created the world's first synthetic motor oil to meet the service requirements of the American Petroleum Institute. From that point on, the stuff once meant for fighter jets began flowing into the cars parked in everyday garages. Now we reach the heart of it, the part so many people have wondered about for years without ever getting a straight answer. How is synthetic oil actually made? Every motor oil, whether conventional or synthetic, begins with something called base oil. Base oil makes up most of the volume in the bottle, and its quality decides most of the quality of the finished product. Here is the interesting part. The oil industry has quietly sorted base oil into 5 groups, numbered 1 through 5. And those 5 groups are the key that unlocks the whole story. Group 1 is the simplest kind. Refined the old way with solvents, still carrying plenty of impurities and uneven molecules. Group 2 has been put through a process called hydrocracking, which means breaking the molecules apart with hydrogen gas under high pressure, producing a much cleaner base oil. Group 3 is Group 2 pushed even further, cracked and refined far more severely at higher temperature and pressure, until it reaches very high purity and an outstanding viscosity index. And this is exactly where millions of drivers have been misled for years. A great many bottles labeled full synthetic sitting right there on the shelf are actually made from Group 3 base oil, which still comes from crude oil, only refined to a point that is nearly perfect. So which part is truly built from nothing? That would be Group 4 and Group 5. Group 4 has a fancy name, polyalpha olefin, usually shortened to PAO. This is the one that is synthesized in the literal sense. People start with ethylene gas, a small and simple molecule, then use a chemical reaction to join those little molecules into larger chains that are even and identical to one another. Group 5 gathers all the rest, and the standout among them is ester oil. a special synthetic oil that clings to metal surfaces and handles heat remarkably well, often blended in to strengthen the formula. These are the very compounds those German scientists spent the war years tinkering with. There is a third road as well, and it answers directly how oil can possibly come from gas. That is gas to liquid technology, turning gas into liquid. At Ras Laffan in Qatar sits a plant called Pearl, the largest gas to liquid plant in the world, run jointly by Qatar's national energy company and the Shell company. It began commercial operation in 2011 and reached full capacity in 2012. Each day it swallows roughly 1.6 billion cubic feet of natural gas and pours out around 140,000 barrels of liquid. Inside, that same old Fischer-Tropsch reaction is reborn at an enormous scale. Natural gas is broken down into the most basic molecular building blocks, then rebuilt into hydrocarbon chains that are small, stable, and astonishingly uniform. The base oil that comes out of this process is so pure it runs nearly as clear as filtered water, with almost none of the sulfur, nitrogen, or aromatic compounds that crude oil always drags along. One producer states that its base oil reaches 99.5% purity. Pause on that image for a second. The stuff flowing out of the pipe, clear as spring water, with none of the smell of crude, is the very foundation of an oil that will protect the heart of a car across hundreds of thousands of miles. For anyone who remembers pulling the dipstick on an old car back in the 70s or 80s and watching a ribbon of oil as black as molasses drip off the end, the contrast is almost impossible to believe. But base oil, no matter how pure, is still not enough. If you poured bare base oil into an engine, it would still be missing a great deal. What gives synthetic oil its real strength is the additive package blended into it. Additives are chemical compounds designed to give the oil special powers depending on what the engine needs. There are detergents that keep the internal parts clean and stop deposits from building up. There are antioxidants that keep the oil from breaking down when it meets oxygen and high heat. There are anti-wear agents, usually a zinc compound whose scientific name is zinc dialkyl dithiophosphate, forming an ultra-thin film over metal surfaces to protect them when two parts press hard against each other under heavy load. And there are viscosity modifiers, special polymers that keep the oil thin enough to flow on a freezing winter morning, yet stop it from thinning out when the engine climbs to hundreds of degrees. Taken together, these additives make up roughly 10 to 30% of what is in the bottle. That is the fine-tuning that turns a smooth base oil into a genuinely high-performance lubricant. When all of these pieces come together in a plant, the journey follows a clear order. First comes selecting the feedstock, usually natural gas or a carefully chosen fraction of crude oil, because that choice lays the foundation for all the quality to follow. Next comes the conversion step, using hydrocracking or gas-to-liquid synthesis to break the raw material into molecular building blocks and rebuild them into small, stable, even hydrocarbons. After that comes purification, stripping out every last trace of sulfur, nitrogen, and tiny bits of metal, leaving behind a crystal-clear base oil. Then comes blending, where the additive package is introduced with extreme precision so that every batch matches the exact specifications set for it. Finally, before it can be bottled, the oil has to prove itself. In the laboratory, its viscosity, stability, volatility, and endurance are measured under conditions that mimic the real harshness inside an actual engine. Only after it passes all of those strict tests does that oil get poured into the familiar bottles on the shelf. Now for a question many people wonder about but rarely hear answered honestly. If most synthetic oil on the shelf is really Group 3 base oil from crude, then why is it allowed to say synthetic? The answer lies in a real dispute back in 1999. Back then, the Mobil company challenged the Castrol company, arguing that Castrol should not call its Group 3 oil synthetic, because Mobil used PAO oil truly synthesized from ethylene. The matter went before an advertising review board in the United States, and the win leaned toward Castrol. The board ruled that Group 3 oil could indeed be called synthetic, because its molecular structure was the result of an intended chemical reaction. That single ruling permanently changed the meaning of the word synthetic on every oil bottle. From then on, the word synthetic became a broad and somewhat loose idea. And that is why two bottles both marked full synthetic can be made in two very different ways inside. There is a detail that engineers know well but that rarely reaches the buyer. In the very base oil classification handbook of the American Petroleum Institute, the one the whole industry treats as its rulebook, there is no category anywhere called synthetic. That book sorts base oil into 5 groups purely by numbers measured in a laboratory, meaning the percentage of saturated molecules, the amount of sulfur, and a figure called the viscosity index that shows how well the oil holds its thickness as the temperature swings. Group 3 is defined simply as oil with saturates above 90%, sulfur below 0.03%, and a viscosity index above 120. That is all. Not one line says whether it counts as synthetic. The very word that millions of people argue over while standing at the shelf turns out to have never lived inside that industry's own technical rulebook. So where does the real difference sit, if not in the label? It sits in the numbers. True PAO oil can keep flowing at 85 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, a cold that almost nowhere in America ever reaches, and it resists heat-driven breakdown far better in high-temperature testing, with a viscosity index that can climb from 125 to more than 200. Group 3 oil is good, but its performance curve usually does not stretch that far. That is the measurable proof that 2 bottles carrying the same word can still be 2 different things. And the part most worth thinking about is why that word lost its meaning at all. It did not lose it because anyone lied. It lost it because technology outran language. When hydrocracking improved to the point where crude oil could be turned into something that nearly matched oil built from gas, the old line between refined and synthesized blurred so far that a board had to sit down and rule on what a single word even meant. Language always arrives late, chasing after whatever people have just built. That does not mean Group 3 oil is bad. In fact, it is very good. Far cleaner and more stable than ordinary mineral oil, and more than capable of protecting a modern engine over oil change intervals much longer than in the old days. It simply is not built from nothing the way PAO or ester is. Understanding that difference is not about running down one bottle to praise another. It is about looking at that row of bottles with clearer eyes, knowing that the word on the label tells only part of the story, while the rest lives in the technical standards printed in small type on the back, such as the API service rating, the European ACEA standard, and the SAE viscosity grade. One more thing deserves to be said plainly, because honesty matters more than advertising. Synthetic oil is not immortal. Its base oil does not naturally spoil quickly, but the additive package inside runs down over time and over the miles rolled. The detergents get used up, the antioxidants weaken, and the oil slowly loses its coat of protection. That is why, no matter how good the oil is, it still has to be changed according to the recommendation in the vehicle owner's manual. Synthetic oil allows for longer intervals than the old days, but it does not erase the need to change the oil. As for whether it is fine to switch back and forth between conventional and synthetic, the honest answer is that switching generally causes no harm, as long as the viscosity grade the engine maker calls for is respected. So the next time anyone stands in front of that row of shiny oil bottles at the shop, the picture will look completely different. Inside that plastic is not simply crude oil cleaned up. It might be natural gas that was broken apart and rebuilt into oil, or molecules assembled from ethylene in a plant, so pure they run clear as water, then blended with a sophisticated additive package and tested through countless brutal trials. It is a liquid that was engineered, nearly molecule by molecule, and its story stretches from wartime laboratories in Europe, across the skies of jet aircraft, all the way to the very engine sitting quietly under the hood out there. And that is the real journey of how synthetic oil is made. If this story was interesting, leave a comment and share one thing. What was the very first oil ever poured into the first car in your life? And do you still remember what that oil looked like when you pulled the dipstick up?